give us a warm welcome for the Premier of the province, Premier Brad Wall.
Thanks, Dave, for the introduction. How's that? There we go. Thanks very much, Dave, for the introduction. Here's the driving report. 2 down, 1 to go. So, I think Mark Twain said that no man's life, liberty, or property is safe when the legislature's in session. It is in session. We just started not too long ago. And as is always the case, the greatest source of perspective for all of us MLAs is each other. We hold each other accountable. And those who come and visit the legislature, especially school kids. It was told to me not long ago that a friend of mine, their daughter, had come up to Regina from Swift Current for a trip to a number of the sites in our capital city. She got home and told her mom that she had been to the Science Center, she had been to the RCMP Museum, and she'd been to where Brad Wall works, the Leisure Center, she said. 7 years ago, about this time of year, in this very building, in fact, there was another conference, another meeting. It was on the future of agriculture. And the keynote speaker that day was a futurist. He was a fellow by the name of Richard Wartzel, who to this day bills himself as Canada's leading futurist. I hope he's got a lot of money. If you're going to bill yourself as a leading futurist, you probably should be pretty well off. He told his audience on that occasion that Saskatchewan farmers could no longer compete with low-cost producers in Asia, in South America, and Eastern Europe. He advised producers to get out of pulses and get out of canola and get out of cereals, get out of the traditional crops. He urged them to diversify into things like growing polyester and molecular monofilaments for nanotechnology. And people were listening then, because in 2006, things weren't as good as they are today. There were challenges around agriculture. There were challenges in rural Saskatchewan as well. People were leaving rural Saskatchewan. Farmers and ranchers were struggling in many respects. Of course, we know that those particular predictions weren't correct. We ought not to be too hard on Mr. Wartzel, though. Predicting the future is a risky business. If anyone has a doubt of it, you should share with us what you think the price of potash will be over the next little while. We'd be interested in hearing that. Today, though, we just fundamentally understand that for some time, there has been an agricultural renaissance underway in Saskatchewan. It is very much at the heart of what we're calling the Saskatchewan Advantage. Realized net farm income is up more than 500% since Mr. Wartzel made those predictions, thanks to higher prices, yes. Thanks to higher sales, yes. And also thanks to the innovation of our producers, of the farming sector. Egg exports are up more than 125%, and surpassed $11 billion for the first time ever. Saskatchewan has overtaken Ontario as Canada's leading agri-food exporter. And because of agricultural exports driving much of the export growth, there's an expectation we will catch and pass British Columbia in terms of the list of Canadian exporting provinces. Not bad for a place without any ports. Saskatchewan's story is a comeback story. It's one that we've talked about a lot over the last number of years. It's one that you've talked a lot about over the last number of years. And a big part of the reason is rural Saskatchewan. The resources that exist in rural Saskatchewan. A big part of that story is agriculture. And a big part of that story is you and the ratepayers that you represent, who, notwithstanding these predictions, never gave up on rural Saskatchewan, never gave up a confidence in agriculture and its future. So today, I just want to begin by saying thank you. On behalf of our government, on behalf of the province, thanks to SARM. The delegates here today, those who were here all those years previously, and thank you to those that you represent. Last fall, we released the Saskatchewan Plan for Growth, Vision 2020 and beyond. Dave was there. A number of you were at some of the meetings we held around the province. Many people noted, including the media, that for the first time in a long time, a government of Saskatchewan's economic document, economic vision, featured agriculture very, very prominently. Our growth plan does contemplate the fact that agriculture today is so very integral to the Saskatchewan success story. So it sets some very specific goals around agriculture and outlines some ideas on how we might get there together. It sets a goal for increased crop production of 10 million tons by 2020. It sets a goal for a 50% boost in agri-food exports by 2020. To meet these objectives, we need to do what we can in terms of farm programs, in terms of crop insurance, more on that in a moment, and we need to continue to invest in agricultural innovation. And we have been as a government. We need to make agricultural research a priority. We have been and we will. Not long ago, together with the Potash Corporation of Saskatchewan, the government announced the Global Food Security Institute at the University of Saskatchewan, right here in Saskatoon, right here on the campus, is where it'll be located. It'll complement the Crop Development Center. It'll complement the private and public partnerships we have already in this province leading the way in agricultural innovation. We're going to focus on new crops, on new crop varieties. We want to return, we have already invested and returned some focus to wheat, which is increasingly important in other parts of the world where the middle class is growing, especially in Africa. The Institute will build on our government's previous and continued support for agriculture that has manifested itself in terms of the largest education tax reduction in Saskatchewan history, record crop insurance coverage, 4 largest agriculture budgets in the province's history, compensation for livestock killed or injured by predators, not previously provided, funding for the control of gophers and beavers and other animals that were ticking Bob Benrod off at the time for those years, and livestock support in terms of loans and payments that we were able to provide because of a growing economy. Agriculture is a priority for this government. Agriculture will continue to be a priority for this government. About the same time Richard Wartzel was making his predictions with respect to agriculture, our party made some predictions of our own. We set a goal. We said this province should set a goal of being 1.1 million people within 10 years, that we should at least grow at the average population growth rate in the country. Some were skeptical. Some said it couldn't be done. A prominent former journalist and now a diplomat, Dale Eisler, wrote a book. It was called False Expectations. It's not long ago, ladies and gentlemen. He wrote that the province's, quote, future remains arguably more uncertain and perhaps less hopeful than ever, end quote. Well, again, we ought not to be too hard on Mr. Eisler. Making predictions is a difficult proposition. But he probably should have titled his book Great Expectations, if the title wasn't taken already, because in the 6 intervening years, this province has grown by 94,000 people, the fastest rate of growth in more than 90 years, and we're on pace to meet that goal we set all those years ago, well ahead of schedule. In fact, the growth plan it sets a new goal. We think we should be 1.2 million people by 2020. It's not just the cities that are growing. It's not just the towns that are growing or the villages. It's RMs that are growing. Immigrants from 175 countries have come to this province, 11,000 this year alone, to realize their dreams right here in Saskatchewan. We're not very many years ago, people said there was less hope here than ever. They've settled in more than 345 communities in this province, not just in Saskatoon, not just in Regina. Expatriates are coming home. They're attracted by the lowest unemployment rate in the country, 3.8%. It's basically full employment. It's basically frictional unemployment at this rate. They're attracted by record average weekly earnings. They're attracted by the thousands of jobs that are still on saskjobs.ca even today. They're coming back because this province is well positioned not for a short-term sprint but for the long run. Because as remarkable as this growth has been for all of us, we ought to remember that generally speaking, the GDP has been growing at between 2 and 3%, sometimes getting closer to 4 in these years, but not at rates that are unsustainable if you've got the fundamentals right. It may be that we are approaching an inflection point where that boom and bust cycle will level out. We'll always cycle up and down. We have too many natural resources not to be subject to a cycling economy. But we see floor prices have changed for the commodities we have. Floor prices are, frankly, a little bit higher than they have been historically, and I think we should have some hope that we might be at an inflection point as long as we're not complacent, as long as we don't take for granted this growth, that as long as governments at all levels are focused on removing the barriers to economic growth in the province. That's a big part of the growth plan, and I hope it's part of your own deliberations, not just here today, not just at midterm, but in your regular meetings on behalf of your ratepayers. We want to get to the point, obviously, where growth is not an anomaly, it's not an aberration, it's something that's steady. 2, 2.5%, 3% growth is a steady prospect, the new reality for our province. It's a nice place to be. Our growth plan is focused on keeping us in that place. Our growth plan's also very honest about what the prime objective is for growth. First of all, we acknowledge that no government should take credit for it. There's too many external factors at play. We should get out of its way, we should facilitate it, and we should remember why we want it in the first place. The end game for growth is that we would have a bigger tax base and a stronger economy so we can invest in health care, so we can invest in education, so we can invest in those who are most vulnerable, and so we can invest in programs like revenue sharing. In the coming fiscal year, municipalities are expected to receive $264 million. You've heard probably many times that that's up from $237 million in the current budget year, and that will be next year an 11% increase to this sector. This is important to note because, as we've signaled, and you'll find out in the budget, most of the other very important third-party partners of government are looking at roughly inflationary increases. Inflation's about 1.6%. So this is a significant increase. Since 2007, here's some examples. Revenue sharing for the RM of Val-Marie, not far from my home, is up 81%. For Buckland, 202%. RM of Weyburn, 136%. RM of Antelope Park, up 95%. This is happening at a time when government's revenues are up 44%. So the revenue sharing model is working for the municipal sector. In fact, your share of the revenue is growing at a greater rate than the government's. Revenue has been growing. These increases have happened at a time when post-secondary education funding is up 37%, when funding to health regions and cancer agencies is up 42%. Now, I will freely and readily admit there's a difference in terms of our municipal sector and these other third parties when we consider these rate increases and why the municipal sector might be experiencing and have experienced over the last 4 years much larger increases. It's because the sector, frankly, was ignored for well over a decade and was not getting what would be an appropriate level of revenue sharing for various reasons we don't have to get into. So we know that there was a lot of catch-up that needed to be done, but we hope there will be an acknowledgement and an understanding of the level of support that there is with this new revenue sharing formula. A remaining issue on the revenue sharing formula is how we distribute it. We asked the parties involved. We asked SARM and SUMA, and Minister Ryder very specifically talked to them and said, you guys sit down and come to an agreement. Tell us how you'd like the allocation to change. And unfortunately, as you will know, there was no consensus. And so now we will make the decision, and we'll announce that decision soon. Our government has, though, come to an important decision on education property tax that I would like to announce here this morning. In 2007, we campaigned on delivering property tax relief, education property tax relief. We delivered it in every sector, but none more so than farmland. Agricultural land has seen decrease in EPT by over 80%. A few months ago, I think it was, Minister Ryder announced that the overall value of property in Saskatchewan as a result of reassessment had gone up a staggering 67% in 4 years. He also said that the province would have to take a close look at the impact of this huge increase on education tax rates, and he said we wouldn't rule out a bit of an increase in education tax rates, tax revenue over and above what is happening from growth in the assessment from new properties. Today I'm pleased to announce that we will hold the line on education property taxes in the upcoming budget. That means education tax rates will be reduced significantly. They'll have to be. The assessment's way up. Mill rates, our mill rate's going to have to come way down across all of the property segments. We're going to do this to achieve revenue neutrality. Now, that doesn't mean that some tax bills aren't going up. Some farmland will see an increase perhaps because their assessment has gone up bigger than the average. But we will implement revenue neutrality. Now, we're going to do that in the context of a reasonably tight budget, but a budget that wants to continue to invest in education. That's just not a this-year prospect. That is a long-term prospect. We're betting on enrollment increases in a lot of places across the province. We're building new schools now, and we'll need more of them in the future, and so there will be a demand for education funding. There is a demand for infrastructure, period, going forward. Dave and I had a chance to talk about it this morning. So what are we going to do with the EPT long-term, delegates? Going to freeze it forever? That's an option, I guess. It has some implications, though. Or do we want to work together, SARM and SUMA and the SSBA, and see what together we can determine for the future of EPT? Obviously, we will never allow this province to get to the point where it was when we did take office and farmland and agriculture and property in general bore such a huge share of the funding of education. It wasn't tenable, it's not efficient, but we are investing in education today. And so I'm asking Minister Marchuk, I'm asking Minister Ryder to form a working group with those three organizations, SUMA, SARM, and the SSBA, and develop a plan for the long term in terms of what we want to do with the EPT, what we want to do in terms of its attachment to infrastructure demands in Saskatchewan going forward. Infrastructure is at the center of the growth plan. It's at the core of our growth plan. We know we need to keep up with the demands, and we know it's not an inexpensive proposition. In our first term, we spent about $5.6 billion in total infrastructure investment in the province. That's almost twice what was spent in the 4 years previous to that term. $3.7 billion in highways alone. That compared to $2.1 billion in the same period before. And even with all that spending, and I just drove up from Swift Current, we know there's a lot more work to be done. There will continue to be a lot more work that is needed to be done. We have committed in the growth plan to another $2.5 billion in infrastructure over the next 3 years. We've created Sask Builds, a new private, well, it's a new Treasury Board crown that will pursue private-public partnerships. We've taken $150 million from the Rainy Day Fund, so it's capitalized, and we're going to ask Sask Builds, and the Minister, Don McMorris, is here. We're going to ask them to provide the government with some long-term plans, as well as some innovative ways to achieve the infrastructure capital investment that we need in the province of Saskatchewan. Another important infrastructure project that is administered very, very well is MREP. And I want to thank you, by the way, for what you've done with this particular program. I can tell you today that there's going to be an increase to MREP in the budget. And again, while we're seeing inflationary increases to third parties, the increase to MREP will be, I would say, significantly more than that inflationary increase that many other partners are getting. You might say on budget day that it's not quite significantly more or significant enough, but I hope you'll see that it is. One additional announcement that we're able to make today in terms of investing in rural Saskatchewan has to do with healthcare. In the last campaign, we offered an idea where we would provide $120,000 student loan forgiveness for doctors if they would practice in rural Saskatchewan. We're actually breaking that promise. We've improved it because since the election, we've listened to those graduates or soon-to-be graduates from the program, and they've told us that so many of the graduating doctors, they don't really have the student loans in the traditional sense. They have financed things on credit cards. They have obviously drained savings accounts, and an incentive would be helpful for rural Saskatchewan, but the student loan piece maybe didn't work. And so we're announcing today, Randy Weeks, our Minister of Rural and Remote Health, has done a great work on this. We thank him for that. He's listened to those doctors, listened to communities, and we're announcing today that we're going ahead with a rural physician recruitment incentive program with a change that it'll simply provide $120,000 over 5 years to recent medical graduates who will practice in rural Saskatchewan. We have also made one more adjustment. I was at a healthcare announcement in my hometown of Swift Current. A young doctor came up to me and said, you know what, this was before we made this change. He said, I like that program, it's good, but I probably am not going to practice in rural Saskatchewan. I'm going to stay in Swift Current. However, she said, I would like to be able to provide coverage in the rural areas. And I might not even need that much of an incentive. I don't want to see the Shaunavon Hospital have to close. If I would have known, I'd like to be able to provide coverage so that these facilities can stay open. And so Randy is recommending a positive adjustment to the program where if those doctors who aren't maybe in rural Saskatchewan will provide coverage, will provide locum support in rural Saskatchewan, they will get a portion of that $120,000 as an incentive for them to do that so we can keep these facilities open and operating. This is one more asset, one more arrow in the quiver that we're trying to put together in terms of the rural doctor issue, the doctor recruitment issue. It also includes more training that we've done since the election, more residency positions, residency training in, outside of the major centers, and broadening the number of countries from which we can attract doctors. It's all part of the plan, and it is a work in progress because it's a challenge that's facing the country, the entire country. We will make these added investments in rural Saskatchewan and a few others in terms of a pretty robust highways budget, I would argue, in the context of a tighter budget, ladies and gentlemen. Resource revenues are softer towards the end of this year, and we think they'll be softer next year than we hoped not very long ago. The oil differential actually affects us. There's lots of talk about its impact in Alberta, but it affects us. Right now, we're selling your oil, because the oil belongs to the people of the province. We sell your oil at about a 19% discount to the Americans. Two reasons for that. One is the blend. We have a bit of heavier oil on the west side, of course, to go along with that light sweet crude in the Bakken and a few other places. But that results in a bit of a discount. The other reason for the discount is pipeline capacity issues, what's happening in Cushing, Oklahoma, and that's why Keystone is important to this province, even though we don't have oil sands yet in Saskatchewan. It's important because it will close the differential. For the Treasury, it means $300 million. We could probably put a little more in MREP if we had that. We could keep taxes a little lower if we had that. We could pay off some debt if we have it. It's important to us. It means $2.5 billion to the oil industry in the province of Saskatchewan alone. Many, many more billions of dollars to the energy economy of the country. Keystone is important. Energy transmission is very, very important. I've been weighing in on the debate. We just got back from Washington. We've raised it. I've had a Twitter fight with Martin Sheen about it. It's kind of one of those surreal moments in my life. By the way, Martin Sheen, when asked by a reporter, he's in this city, they said, do you have a message for Premier Brad Wall because he's going down to Washington to lobby for Keystone? He said, and I quote, to me, don't do this. It's not going to be something you're going to be proud of in the future. I hope he gave that advice to Charlie every now and then. We're proud of our position with respect to the environment. We need to do better. And the confluence of energy and the environment, we're proud that we're the second largest exporter of oil in this country, and we need to step up and defend the interests of Saskatchewan and a part of the economy that's paying a lot of bills today. Our neighbors to the west have been hit harder by the differential. Their discount's 30+% because it's bitumen and that much heavier. We're fortunate because we're more diversified. We have other things that we're exporting, and we have agriculture to a greater degree than any other place in the country. So we're fortunate in that respect. But we are not taking anything for granted as a result of the softening resource revenue. We're going to balance this budget. We're going to continue with our plan to make government 15% smaller, which, by the way, is on track. It's a 4-year program that'll save the taxpayers $200 million, and we've been able to do it in a way where I don't think service has declined or people have really noticed the change. We're going to continue to use lean across government and in the healthcare sector. We're going to do what we need to do to balance the budget. And by the way, we ask of our partners the same. We know that you do that. Obviously, the most efficient order of government is the one closest to the ratepayer, closest to the citizen. But I think we ought not to be complacent about ways to get more efficient, about ways to save money, to get a little smaller, to maintain this core Saskatchewan advantage, which is fiscal probity, fiscal responsibility. And by the way, this very much will be an ongoing priority of our government. The balanced budget and fiscal responsibility is the cornerstone of the growth plan. We see other jurisdictions taking a different path. And, you know, it's tempting because, as our first finance minister, Rod Gannifor, reminded us, there's not a lot of choices in cabinet between good and dumb ideas. There's a few of those, but not very many. Most of the choices are between good and other good ideas. And we represent all of you, and we'd like to say yes to a lot of things. Economists will often say it's okay at a downturn in the economy or in things that are a little flat. It's okay, John Maynard Keynes said this, you know, in the 19th century, it's okay to deficit finance. But the problem with that, delegates, is that it's not economists then that have to balance the budget. It's politicians. And it's why they take either so long to balance or they just don't get balanced. And then soon that deficit's eating away from programs for rural Saskatchewan and eating away from our ability to keep taxes competitive or to continue to pay off the debt. And we're not going there. We're just not going there. We have chosen this different path, ladies and gentlemen. I think it was chosen 7 years ago, not by a political party, not by a government, but by all of you who weren't maybe interested in Mr. Wartzel's conclusions, who decided on a different future for this province. There are many, perhaps, who think it's not going to last, this growth that we see in Saskatchewan. But there have been a lot of surprises in Saskatchewan lately. Who would have thought we'd be setting these population records? Who would have thought we'd be leading the country in economic growth? Who would have thought G. Roy Simon would ever sign with the Riders? Who would have thought a kid from southern Saskatchewan would be the snowboarding champion of Earth? Who would have thought another kid from Weyburn would be a leader on the PGA, literally finishing top 9 at the Honda Classic? Things are changing. There's a lot of firsts that are happening in the province. And it's heady stuff, but we need to remember the basics and the fundamentals. Here in Saskatchewan, we balance the books. Here in Saskatchewan, we keep taxes competitive. Here in Saskatchewan, we invest in infrastructure. Here in Saskatchewan, we never forget how we got here in the first place. And that's why rural Saskatchewan, that's why agriculture will remain a priority for our government. And that's why, for your leadership, we say thank you. May God bless the province of Saskatchewan.